They bound me to the beams at high noon, arms stretched until my shoulders ached, my skin sizzling under the merciless sun. I'd known that timber all my life. It was the frame of an old stockade gate, dragged out to the square and set upright so I could be displayed like a carcass. Folks I'd once broken bread with stood in the dust below, some silent, some whispering, some smiling as if my disgrace were a show worth their afternoon. A boy, just 12, maybe 13, broke the hush. His stone struck my cheekbone sharp, rattling through my skull. My cry was swallowed by the heat and by their jeers. That was the moment I understood. I was not just abandoned, I was condemned. My neighbors, my kin by distance if not by blood, had chosen to believe a lie rather than the truth of the woman who'd sat among them at church, who'd carried water for their wives, who'd watched over their children when sickness swept through. "Thief!" someone spat, a woman's voice. I knew her, Margaret, who once pressed her baby into my arms when she was too weak to nurse. She didn't look at me when she said it. None of them did. They looked at the dirt, the sky, each other, anywhere but my eyes. The ropes cut into my wrists until I could feel the damp warmth of my own blood soaking the fibers. My throat was parched raw, every swallow scraping like sand. Still, I forced the words out. "I didn't steal. You know me. You know I didn't." My plea rang thin, drowned beneath a ripple of laughter. Luke stood at the edge of the crowd, hands folded easy, eyes locked on me like a hunter who'd snared his quarry. His smirk told me he'd already won. It wasn't just the sun burning me that day. It was the fire of betrayal, hotter than any desert heat, a fire that would not die easy.
The sun blurred the world around me until shapes bled into one another, but pain kept my mind sharp enough to wander. Every jeer, every turned face drew me back to the night it all began. Luke had cornered me behind the church after service, where the lantern light barely reached. He smelled of whiskey and sweat, leaning close with that grin that always set my stomach turning. "A fine woman shouldn't be wasting herself alone," he whispered, his hand pressing against my hip. I shoved him back hard enough that he stumbled, his pride cut deeper than his skin ever could be. I thought it would end there, that shame might sober him. But a man like Luke, his father's money fattened his swagger, his father's name guarded his misdeeds. He wasn't built to hear the word no. Days later, whispers spread that I'd taken 2 head of cattle from their pens. By the week's end, the whole town nodded at each other as though it were fact written in scripture. Eliza stole from the Hayes Ranch. I wanted to laugh at first. Me, with no land to my name, no cart strong enough to haul so much as a calf. But the laughter died quick when Sheriff Collins arrived at my door with a solemn face and a rope already in hand. It struck me, standing bound before my neighbors, that I wasn't suffering for theft. I was suffering for defiance, for daring to shove off the hand of the man who thought he owned me. The cattle were just the story he used to make me small enough to bind. Rage curled up from the pit of my stomach, but it tangled with something far heavier, sorrow. I had thought myself part of this community, held by the invisible ties of shared labor and loss. Instead, I was nothing more than kindling for Luke's bruised ego. I lowered my head against the glare of the sun, whispering to myself, though no one cared to listen, "I know the truth. I'll hold it even if I burn for it."
The world had gone soft around the edges, sweat running into my eyes, when I felt the scrape of steel at my wrist. At first I thought the sun had conjured it, a mercy-born dream. But then I saw him, Jacob, his face grim, his jaw clenched, a blade sawing careful against the ropes. Jacob, the quiet sort, never one to speak more than needed. He was no kin to me, no blood, yet I'd seen him mend fences for widows, stay late at the mill for no pay, carry burdens no one asked him to. Now his calloused hands shook as he worked the knot. "Jacob," I croaked, my voice more dust than sound, but the relief in my chest near broke me. Before the last strand gave, a shout tore through the square. Luke. He strode forward with his farmhand at his side, a big-shouldered brute with fists like hammers. Luke's smirk had vanished. In his place gleamed a blade that caught the sun. "Leave her be," Luke drawled, but there was no ease in his tone now, only threat. "She stays right where she is." Jacob rose slow, planting himself between me and them. He had no weapon but the knife he'd borrowed to cut my bonds, yet he stood tall enough to make Luke falter. The crowd hushed, caught between spectacle and fear. A man defying Luke Hayes in broad daylight? That was near unheard of. Luke lifted his knife, wagging it lazy like he owned the ground we all stood on. "You don't want this trouble, Jacob." But Jacob didn't budge. He slid the blade to his side, his voice steady as stone. "Then don't bring it." Hope, small and fragile, stirred in my chest. For the first time since the ropes had bound me, I was not alone.
The farmhand moved first, like a bull seeing red. He lunged for Jacob, his fists swinging wild. Jacob ducked low, caught the man's arm and drove his shoulder hard into his gut. The brute staggered, air wheezing out of him. But he came again, fists pounding. Jacob met each blow with grit, his boots digging into the dirt like roots. The crowd circled tighter, their jeers dimming to silence. This wasn't sport anymore. This was something raw. I strained against the half-cut ropes, the fibers biting deeper as I twisted, desperate to see. Then Luke rushed forward, his knife flashing. He slashed at Jacob's ribs, but Jacob caught his wrist, twisting until the blade clattered to the ground. A cheer broke from my throat before I knew it, half sob, half fury. "Tell them, Eliza," Jacob barked, his voice rough with strain. And I did. My throat burned, but the words poured out, jagged and fierce. "He lies. He put hands on me. When I said no, he called me a thief." The words struck harder than any stone. Faces in the crowd turned, shifting, uncertain. I saw Margaret pale, her lips parting as if she'd swallowed her own shame. Jacob slammed Luke down into the dust, pinning him, his chest heaving. "Hear her!" he roared, his eyes blazing at the townsfolk who had bound me. "Hear the truth you've been blind to." Luke spat dirt, but his power was cracked open for all to see. He wasn't untouchable anymore. He was just a man lying in the dust, with my voice cutting him deeper than any knife. And for the first time, I felt my own strength rise back through the bruises, carried on Jacob's defiance. The knife lay in the dirt, gleaming wicked in the sun. Jacob bent, scooped it up, and held it high for all to see. The handle was carved with the letter L, branded deep into the bone. Luke's mark, as plain as his own face. My breath caught. I remembered nights at the saloon when he'd flaunt that blade, boasting how no other man dared carry steel with his initials. Now it was the very weight of his undoing. "That knife," I rasped, forcing my voice through the pain, "was found with the stolen cattle.
Ask yourself why. Ask who'd leave their mark upon the crime. Luke scrambled to his knees, his face red, words tumbling from him in stammers. She planted it. But even as he said it, the lie tasted sour. The crowd saw it. The farm hand dropped his gaze, no longer willing to hold his master's shame. Jacob's grip on the knife never wavered. His voice was quiet, but it carried. This here is proof enough, and I'll put it in Sheriff Collins' hands before the day's out. The crowd shifted, uneasy, their whispers crawling like insects through the heat. The certainty that had bound me to those beams now wavered, cracked by steel and truth. Strength welled in me, shaky but alive. My voice rose steadier than before. He lied because I told him no, because he thought he could take what he wanted, and when he failed, he tried to break me instead. Jacob turned, his eyes meeting mine. There was no pity in them, only resolve. "We ride to the sheriff," he said, his jaw set firm. The knife, once a symbol of Luke's swagger, had become the blade that cut through his lies.
By the time Jacob cut me fully loose, my arms hung numb and purpled, the blood rushing back like fire. He slung me over his horse with a gentleness that near undid me, then mounted behind, the knife wrapped tight in cloth at his belt. The crowd parted as we passed. No one dared bar our way, though some spat, some turned their faces, and a few, God bless 'em, looked ashamed. The ride into town was slow, every hoofbeat rattling my sore bones. I clung to the saddle horn, my head against Jacob's chest, his heartbeat steady where mine raced. Dust rose behind us, carrying with it the weight of a whole town's guilt. When we pushed through the sheriff's door, the cool dimness near dropped me to my knees. Sheriff Collins looked up from his desk, his eyes narrowing at the sight of me bruised and ragged. He stood, his hand hovering near his badge, as if its shine might steady him. Jacob laid the knife down hard on the desk. "This here proves she's no thief." Collins's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked from the blade to me, then to Jacob, then back again. I saw the storm brewing in his eyes. Fear, calculation, duty. For Luke's father was more than a rancher. He was the purse that fed half this town. "You bring me trouble," he muttered. I forced myself upright, though my legs shook. My voice cracked but did not falter. "Sheriff, I was bound in the sun for a crime I never committed. Luke put hands on me. When I denied him, he called me a thief. That knife is proof of his lie. I'll speak it before you, before the council, before God himself if I must." The room went still. Collins's eyes lingered on the bruises round my wrists. The blood dried on my cheek. He rubbed his temples slow, like a man weighing the price of his own soul. At last he sighed. "I'll put it to the council. But Eliza," he paused, heavy as a gallows, "this town won't forgive easy what you forced it to see." I nodded, though my throat burned. "Then let them see it anyway."
The council gathered that evening in the meeting hall. Lanterns lit, though the sun had barely dipped behind the ridge. The whole town pressed close, bodies packed tight, their murmurs thick as smoke. At the long table sat 5 men with solemn faces, merchants, ranchers, the preacher, each weighing their words before they were even spoken. Sheriff Collins stood off to the side, arms crossed, the knife laid bare on the table before 'em. Luke's father was there too, towering behind his son, his mustache bristling like a storm cloud ready to break. Luke slouched at his chair, the bandage on his jaw from Jacob's blow, his eyes darting anywhere but mine. When Collins cleared his throat, the hall hushed. "You all know why we're here. Eliza claims she's no thief. She says Luke Hayes put the brand of his knife on stolen cattle, and here it lies before us." Gasps fluttered as the lantern light caught the carved L. No one could deny it. My legs shook as I rose, but Jacob's hand brushed my elbow, steadying me. I drew breath, tasting iron on my tongue. "You all bound me in the square today. You watched me burn under the sun, and you did it because you believed Luke's word over mine." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. "He came to me with his hands, and I said no. That's the only crime I ever committed. His lie was punishment for my refusal." The silence was deep, broken only by the creak of benches. I saw eyes drop, guilt rising like fever. Margaret wept into her hands. A few men shifted in shame, unable to meet my gaze. Luke lurched up, his shrill voice. "He lies! He wants to ruin me, ruin my father!" "Sit down," Collins barked, his voice sharp as a whip. Then Collins turned, his jaw set hard. "This town nearly killed an innocent woman because it was easier to believe a lie than to face the truth. Luke Hayes will answer for his words before the law." The air changed then. Not applause, not cheer, just the heavy weight of realization settling on every soul present. For once, the lie had cracked, and truth stood in its place. When the gavel struck, the sound rang through the hall like a rifle shot. My knees buckled with the weight of it, but I steadied myself. I would not fall now, not when the truth had finally clawed its way to light. The crowd parted as I stepped outside. The air was cooler now, dusk painting the sky in bruised colors that matched my skin. I drew it into my lungs slow, savoring it. For the first time in days, the air didn't taste like judgment. Jacob followed close, his shadow stretching long beside mine. He didn't speak right away. He never wasted words. But when his hand brushed mine, I felt more than any sentence could carry. Behind us, Luke's father argued with Collins, his voice sharp, promising ruin. I knew this wasn't the end. Money and power don't die quiet. But I also knew I wasn't the woman who had been tied to those beams anymore. I turned to the faces gathered outside the hall, the same faces that had jeered or turned away or cast the first stone. "You all saw what you chose to believe," I said, my voice low but steady, "and you all saw the cost. Next time you look away from truth, remember what nearly happened today." Some shifted, some wept, and some stared cold. But I didn't need their absolution, not anymore. Jacob nodded once, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. "You faced 'em," he said simply. I lifted my chin toward the fading sun. "No, I survived 'em. Facing 'em comes tomorrow." The square where I had burned that morning was quiet now, shadows long, the wood beams still standing. I stared at 'em one last time. They hadn't broke me, and so long as I breathed, I'd make sure no other woman burned for a man's lie. The night settled in, and with it, a promise. I would carry the scar of that sun,
but I would also carry its light.